The day my father sold our house, he didn't ask me. He didn't warn me. He didn't even tell me until strangers were already walking through the living room. "It's just a house," he said. Like the place my mother built with her hands, the place where every wall held a memory, meant nothing. But what he didn't know was this. 10 years later, I would walk back into that same house, holding the keys, not as his son, not as the kid he pushed aside, but as the owner, and the look on his face when he realized was worth every year I waited, once with money, then again with memory. That's the thing people don't understand when they talk about property like it's only math. A house is never just walls if you grew up inside it. It becomes the shape of your childhood, the rhythm of your mornings, the sound the stairs make when someone comes home late, the smell of paint from the summer your mother redid the kitchen because she said, "If we have to live here, it should feel like ours." Our house was small, not poor, not wealthy, just real. 3 bedrooms, a front yard my father mowed badly, a back garden my mother loved too much for the climate it existed in, a narrow hallway, a kitchen that always felt warmer than the rest of the house because sunlight hit the windows at exactly the right angle in the afternoon. Nothing about it would have impressed strangers, but it was the only place in my life that ever made complete sense. My mother made it that way. She chose everything carefully. Curtains, cabinet handles, the blue ceramic bowl by the front door where keys went and never stayed, the reading corner in the living room where she kept books she swore she'd finish someday. My father paid for the house. My mother made it matter. That distinction became very important later. He didn't become cruel in one dramatic scene. That would have been easier to understand, easier to hate. No, my father changed the way weather changes, gradually enough that by the time you realize the season is different, everything familiar already looks wrong. My parents' marriage started deteriorating when I was 15, not because of one scandal, not even because of one betrayal, as far as I know. Because my father had a gift for emotional absence that made every room colder eventually. He showed up physically, paid bills, said practical things, but he treated family life like something that should run efficiently in the background while he focused on more important matters. My mother used to make excuses for him. He's tired. He's under pressure. He doesn't mean it the way it sounds. That's how women often narrate themselves into smaller heartbreaks until one day they realize they've become translators instead of partners. When the divorce finally happened, no one shouted. That was the strange part. No broken plates, no scene, just paperwork, soft voices, boxes. My mother moved out first, quietly, taking photos, books, a few pieces of furniture, and most of the meaning with her. I remember standing in the driveway watching her pack the car and asking the only question that mattered. "What happens to the house?" She looked at me for a moment too long before answering. "You'll always have somewhere to come back to." At the time, I thought she meant the house. Years later, I realized she meant herself. After she left, my father said something I believed, because I was still young enough to think fathers understood the weight of their own words. "This is still your home." Simple sentence, calm tone, firm enough to sound permanent. I held on to that sentence harder than I admitted, because divorce doesn't just split families, it destabilizes geography. Suddenly you don't know which place is yours, which room still belongs to you, which table you're expected at. So when my father said that, I treated it like law. My room stayed the same for a while. Posters on the wall, books on the shelf, desk by the window, The small crack in the ceiling paint above the closet that I used to stare at when I couldn't sleep. I thought that meant continuity. Really, it just meant transition hadn't finished yet. The first real sign that I had misunderstood everything was literally a sign. A white one, staked into the grass. I came home from school one Thursday afternoon and saw it from half a block away. For sale. Red letters. Agent number underneath. A photo of a smiling woman I didn't know. For a second I thought it had to be a mistake. Wrong address, prank, temporary posting error, anything but the obvious. Then I saw two strangers walking through our front door. A couple in their 40s, talking quietly and pointing at windows, like they were already measuring curtains. I stopped in the driveway holding my backpack so tightly the strap cut into my hand. It's strange what your body remembers in moments like that. The sound of a car passing, a dog barking somewhere 2 houses down, the way the late afternoon light hit the front windows and made the house look detached from me already. I walked inside. The strangers smiled at me politely the way people smile at someone they assume is incidental. And there, standing in the kitchen with a real estate brochure in one hand and a coffee mug in the other, was my father. I think I asked, "What's going on?" But the question came out flatter than I expected, because some part of me already knew. He didn't look guilty. That was the worst part. He looked inconvenienced, like I had arrived before he figured out the easiest version of the explanation. Then he said the sentence I would replay in my head for years. It's time to move on. Not we're thinking about selling. Not I wanted to talk to you first. Not I'm sorry. Just a decision, already made. The sale wasn't about money, not entirely. That's what I understood later. At the time, he framed it that way. Fresh start. Too much house for just the two of us. Better location. Practical reasons. But people don't sell memory that fast unless they're trying to erase something. And my father was already in the early stages of erasing us. Not me specifically. Us. The version of his life that had required effort, compromise, and old emotional debts he didn't want to keep paying. A month after the sign went up, I met the woman who made the real reason obvious. Her name was Denise. Perfect hair, perfect nails, perfectly timed laugh. The kind of woman who enters a room as if she has already improved it. She had a daughter named Chloe and a son named Mason, both younger than me, both immediately comfortable in my father's attention in a way that told me this was not their first dinner together. That realization hit harder than the house sale in some strange way, because suddenly the timeline reassembled itself. The quick decision, the refusal to discuss it, the need to move on. He wasn't moving on alone. He was making room. And there is no clearer way to understand your place in a parent's life than to realize the home you thought was yours is being sold to create space for the version of family they prefer. I tried once to make him understand what the house meant. Really tried. We were in the garage sorting old boxes because the closing date had been set and everything suddenly moved faster than my emotions could keep up with. I held one of my mother's old planters in my hands, empty now, cracked on one side, and said, "Why this house?" He kept taping a cardboard box without looking up. "Because it's practical." It was Mom's. His jaw tightened slightly. It was a property. That sentence changed everything, because suddenly I understood that he wasn't just selling the house. He was redefining it, reducing it, stripping it of memory so he wouldn't have to feel what he was doing. "It's just a house," he said. That was the sentence. The one that stayed. Not because it was cruel in an obvious way, because it was efficient. A complete emotional liquidation of everything that mattered to me, phrased like common sense. And if you've ever loved something someone else had the power to classify as replaceable, you know exactly how violent that kind of sentence can be. He moved us into a luxury apartment across town. Modern, cold, open floor plan, floor-to-ceiling windows that were supposed to feel aspirational and mostly felt like nowhere to hide. Nothing in that place had history. That was probably the point. Denise visited constantly before she officially moved in. Then she moved in unofficially, then officially. Then her kids arrived with boxes, shoes, noise, and a confidence about the space that I couldn't stand. Chloe took over the bathroom, nearest my room, before anyone even asked. Mason spread gaming equipment across the den my father had once described as a possible study space for me. The apartment filled quickly with their routines, their snacks, their TV shows, their voices. And just like that, I became a guest in my father's second life too. That's when the real lesson of displacement finally became clear. Losing a home hurts less than realizing it was only the first thing they planned to replace. There was a day, maybe 6 months after the move, when I almost said it out loud. I was talking to a friend after school, and I started to say, "Come over to my house." I stopped halfway through the sentence. Because it wasn't my house. Not the apartment. Not anymore. And the old house was gone. Sold. Renovated by strangers. Probably painted some terrible modern shade of white that erased the warmth from every room my mother once touched. That's the thing about loss. Sometimes it doesn't arrive in one blow. It arrives in grammar. In the moment you realize you no longer have a place simple enough to name, the practical damage came later. Because of course it did. That's how family wounds work. First emotional, then financial, then structural. When I graduated high school, I started talking about college. Not abstractly, specifically, applications, costs, options. And that was when my father finally admitted something else he hadn't told me. The sale of the house had not simply funded the new apartment and his transition. It had also eaten through the savings he once claimed would help with my tuition. There had never been a formal college fund. Not exactly. Just years of statements and reassurances and phrases like, "We'll make sure you're taken care of." Apparently, taken care of had been sold with the hardwood floors. When I asked how much was left, he avoided the number. When I pressed, he got annoyed. When he got annoyed, he used practicality again. "You're old enough to start standing on your own feet." Interesting timing for that lesson, especially from a man who had just spent tens of thousands reinventing his personal life. That was when something in me hardened permanently. Because until then, I still thought the house sale had been emotional carelessness. Selfish, yes, but maybe not strategic. Now I saw it clearly. He didn't just sell memory. He sold runway. My runway. The cushion between me and adulthood. The thing that would have made starting life easier. And he sold it without even granting me the respect of calling it sacrifice. If my father expected gratitude, obedience, or collapse, he got none of the three. I left for college anyway. Loans, part-time work, scholarships, anything I could piece together. But I left with something stronger than the plan he stripped from me. I left with a map, not of where I was going, of what I would never let anyone take from me again. At first, I thought that map was emotional. Distance, boundaries, self-sufficiency. I was wrong. It became financial. Because when someone sells the place that made you feel safe, you stop trusting feelings of security. You start trusting ownership, leverage, timing, control. That's why years later I got into real estate. Not because I loved houses, because I understood what they do to people when they become vulnerable. A home is a dream while you live in it. An asset when you're forced to leave it. A weapon if you know when to buy it back. I didn't know the old house would return to me yet, but some part of me started preparing for that day before I could admit it consciously. And the funny thing? The man who taught me that lesson never realized he was teaching it. I thought selling the house was the worst thing my father would ever do to me. I was wrong. Because years later, when I finally found out who he sold it to, I realized the house was never meant to disappear from my life. It was meant to come back to me at exactly the right moment. And when it did, I wasn't going to buy back memory. I was going to buy back power. By the time I finished my second year of college, my father had fully settled into his new life. Not transitioned, not adjusted, replaced. That's the word that finally fit. Denise wasn't just living with him anymore. She had redesigned everything. New furniture, new routines, new traditions. Her children, Chloe and Mason, didn't act like guests. They acted like they had always been there. And my father encouraged it. That was the part that mattered. Not what they did, what he allowed. At first I was still invited. Birthdays, holidays, occasional dinners. But invitations don't mean inclusion. I was there, but never central. Conversations moved around me. Decisions happened without me. Stories were told that I wasn't part of. And slowly, I stopped being necessary. One Christmas I arrived 10 minutes early. No one opened the door. Not because they weren't home, because they hadn't expected me yet. Inside I could hear them laughing. Denise, Chloe, Mason, my father. The kind of laughter that only happens when everyone in the room feels like they belong. I stood there for a few seconds, holding a gift I didn't want to give anymore. Then I knocked. And when my father opened the door, his smile came a second too late. That's when I understood something final. I wasn't part of the family anymore. I was a visitor. It took me a while to notice the financial side of it, because emotional loss distracts you from structural damage. But once I started paying attention, the pattern was obvious. The money from the house hadn't just funded my father's fresh start. It had funded Denise's life too. Her children's schools, their expenses, their comfort. The house I lost had become the foundation of the family that replaced me. That realization didn't make me angry, not immediately. It made me focused. Because anger burns fast, focus builds slowly. And I had learned something very important by then. The only way to undo something like this is not emotionally, it's structurally. While my father built his new life, I built mine quietly. No announcements, no social media, no family updates, just work. I started in real estate analytics, then acquisitions, then distressed property investment. I didn't chase luxury, I chased opportunity, foreclosures, short sales, properties people were forced to let go of. Because I understood something most investors ignored. A house changes meaning the moment someone can't afford to keep it. And that moment is where leverage exists. My first real deal wasn't impressive. A small duplex, undervalued, poorly managed. I bought it, fixed operational issues, rented it properly, sold it for a profit. Nothing dramatic. But it proved something. The model worked. After that, things scaled, not explosively. Strategically, I reinvested everything, built a portfolio, then a network, then access to deals most people never saw, because distressed property isn't listed publicly at first. It moves quietly, between people who understand risk. By the time I was 28, I was financially stable. By 30, I was building something substantial, but my family didn't know. because I never told them, and they never asked. It happened on a normal Tuesday morning. No drama, no build-up, just a listing. I was reviewing properties like I always did. Numbers, locations, condition, opportunity. Then I saw it, the address. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but then I saw the photos, the layout, the structure, and everything stopped. For a few seconds, I didn't move, didn't think, didn't breathe properly, because some things don't disappear. They wait, and the house had been waiting. The interior looked different, renovated, modernized. The warmth my mother created had been stripped away, replaced with neutral tones, clean lines, minimal design. It looked expensive, but empty. But some things couldn't be erased. The angle of the staircase, the position of the kitchen windows, the shape of the backyard, the small structural details that no renovation can fully remove. It was still the same house. Underneath everything, quick sale, motivated seller, below market price. That combination meant one thing: pressure, and pressure creates opportunity. I didn't hesitate. I contacted the agent immediately, scheduled a viewing, prepared an offer, not emotional, strategic. Because if there's one thing I learned, it's this. You don't buy back something like that with nostalgia. You buy it with leverage. Walking into the house again felt strange. Not emotional at first, analytical. I looked at structure, condition, layout, but then something shifted, because memory doesn't disappear, it layers. And suddenly, I wasn't just evaluating a property, I was standing inside my past. The agent mentioned something casually before I left. There's already another interested buyer. That was the moment everything changed, because this wasn't just a purchase anymore. It was a fight. And I wasn't the only one who wanted the house. I've been in enough deals to know one thing. Another interested buyer usually means pressure. Sometimes fake, sometimes real. But in this case, it was very real. The agent hesitated before giving details, which told me everything. "Who is it?" I asked. She checked her notes, then said a name I hadn't heard in years. My father. For a moment, I thought I misheard. My father? Yes, she said carefully. He mentioned he used to own the property. Of course he did. That's how he justified it. Not as a mistake. Not as something he regretted. As something he could simply reclaim. At first, I didn't understand why. Then the agent added something else. He's purchasing with his wife. That's when it made sense. Denise. Of course. Because to her, this wasn't my childhood home. It was an upgrade. A bigger house, better status, a new version of the life she had built with him. I didn't react immediately. That's another lesson I learned. The moment you show emotion in a deal, you lose control. So I nodded, asked neutral questions. Timeline? Offer range? Seller preference? Everything looked normal on paper, but nothing about this was normal. I didn't go higher immediately. That's what amateurs do. They panic, they overbid, they reveal how much something means to them. I did the opposite. I went quiet. The current owners weren't emotional about the house. That was important. They wanted speed, certainty, clean closing. That meant I didn't need to win with the highest number. I needed to win with the best structure. I submitted an offer, slightly below asking, but with terms that mattered. Fast close. No financing contingencies. Clean inspection window. Confidence. The kind of offer sellers don't ignore. 2 days later, the agent called. He countered. Higher price, more aggressive, but messy, financing involved. Conditions. Delays. Typical of someone trying to win emotionally, that was the moment I understood everything. My father wasn't buying from strength. He was stretching, trying to reclaim something he had already let go. Using leverage he barely controlled, which meant one thing: he was vulnerable. Over the next week, the bidding went back and forth. Not dramatic, precise, calculated, each move revealing more about the other side. He increased price. I improved terms. He pushed timeline. I removed risk. From the outside, it looked like a normal negotiation, but underneath, it was something else. Then came the moment that decided everything. The agent called again. "They're asking for final offers." No more back and forth. No more adjustments. One decision, one outcome. I didn't just submit a number. I submitted certainty. Above asking. All cash. Immediate close. No conditions. No delays. No uncertainty. The kind of offer that ends a conversation. 24 hours later, I got the call. "You got it." Just like that. 10 years of distance. Closed in a single sentence. I didn't celebrate. Didn't call anyone. Didn't react. Because some victories don't feel loud. They feel complete. The paperwork moved quickly. Funds transferred. Ownership recorded. Keys handed over. And just like that, the house was mine. I didn't rush the next step, because the purchase wasn't the ending. It was the setup. The real moment was still coming. A week later, my father called me. Frustrated. Confused. "Do you know who bought the house?" I paused, then said calmly, "Yes." There was a pause on the line, long enough to feel intentional. "Who?" my father asked. His voice wasn't calm anymore. Not angry either. Uncertain. That was new. I looked out the window of my office, then answered simply, "Me." No reaction at first. Just silence. Because some answers take a second to register. Then, "That's not funny. I'm not joking." Another pause. This one heavier. "You're saying you bought the house?" "Yes." Something changed in his tone immediately. Not disbelief. Recognition. Because for the first time, he was forced to reconsider everything he thought he knew about me. "You had that kind of money?" I didn't answer that directly. Because the question wasn't really about money. It was about identity. "Come see it," I said. He hesitated. "Why?" "Because you should." I didn't explain further. Because explanation would weaken the moment. And this moment had been building for 10 years. They didn't come alone. Of course they didn't. My father arrived with Denise, Chloe, Mason, the full version of the family he had built after selling mine. They stood outside the house for a moment, looking at it. Not as owners, as outsiders. And that alone was already a reversal. I opened the door, stepped aside. "Come in." My father walked in slowly. Denise followed, her expression already tense. Chloe and Mason stayed closer to the doorway, less confident than they used to be, because space changes behavior, and this space was no longer theirs. My father stopped in the living room, looked around. The renovations were still there, modern, clean. But I had changed a few things, not everything, just enough. The kitchen light fixture, the corner by the window, a small shelf where my mother used to keep her books. Details most people wouldn't notice. But he did. Because memory doesn't disappear. "I made a few changes," I said calmly. He nodded slowly, not trusting his voice yet, because this wasn't just a house anymore. It was evidence of what had been lost and what had been taken back. Denise was the first to break the silence. "This is unexpected." She forced a small smile. "But it's a nice investment," Investment. She reduced it immediately, just like he had. I looked at her. No, this isn't an investment. This is my home. The word landed differently this time, because now it was backed by ownership, not permission. My father finally turned to me. Why didn't you tell me? I met his eyes. You didn't tell me when you sold it. That ended the question. Completely. For the first time in years, he didn't have a response, no justification, no explanation. Because now he was standing inside the result of his own decision. Denise tried again. We were actually trying to buy it. I know. Her expression tightened. You knew? Yes. I stepped forward slightly, not aggressive. Just clear. You couldn't afford it. Silence. Because that was the truth. And truth doesn't need to be loud. My father looked around the house again. Slower this time. Like he was seeing it properly. Not as an asset. Not as a decision. But as something he had misunderstood completely. I didn't think... He started. Then stopped. Because whatever he was about to say was 10 years too late. You said it was just a house, I reminded him. Quietly. He nodded. I was wrong. Denise shifted uncomfortably. So what happens now? I looked at her, then at him, then around the house. The same thing that always happens. I live here. That was it. No revenge speech, no dramatic exit, no destruction. Because the point was never to hurt them. The point was to take back what mattered, and redefine it on my terms. They left the house slowly, not rushed, not forced, just aware of what had changed, of what had been lost, and of what they could no longer control. My father sold the place that meant everything to me, so I bought it back. And this time, no one could take it away from me again.